All right, Jeff Bodell, welcome to the podcast, man. I really appreciate you coming on. You got the book, the Warfighters Lounge, coming out here pretty soon about your time in Marjah. So that's pretty exciting. I got a chance to look at it over the weekend, started reading into it, and I've enjoyed it. I think it's always good to hear the perspective of the enlisted guy on the ground. We get these big picture, general, huge like theater-wide decision makers coming on and or talking and writing books and stuff, but a lot of times the guy on the ground, where the meat meets the grinder, is like kind of left out of the conversation. So I always like it when guys like you decide to do that. What made you decide to write a book?
Well, my book's only about 4 hours of my life. Unlike a lot of combat memoirs that I read that are about, this is what it's like to go to recruit training, become a Marine, that environment, and then go deploy or an entire deployment. This is just one experience of combat, and it's a traumatic thing. And I started writing it not too long after returning from the war.
Yeah.
Just remembering everything that somebody said or what I saw, just wrote it down. And a big part of it was because a Marine was killed in action, and his family was told that he was killed a certain way by the Marine Corps and by the government, and it was not accurate. And so part of that was writing it for the family so they could at least understand how their son was killed from my perspective.
Now, when you say it wasn't accurate, was it that, do you think, was it completely misrepresented? Or, I mean, that must be in the book. That must be a part I haven't gotten to yet. That's kind of crazy, right? That they would lie to a family about how someone was killed?
I don't think it was a lie. Honestly, I try not to be that skeptical.
Yeah.
I think it was, Marjah, there's a lot of stuff going on.
For sure.
They want to tell the family something. So our report was, we were on a dismounted patrol and he was killed by a blast. Some of the guys on my team thought it was an IED. I had a different perspective, and I'm pretty clear he got hit in the chest by an RPG, and it was not an IED. So when we say, we were dismounted, maybe somewhere along the lines, they thought we were in trucks and we got out of the trucks. But in Marine Corps terminology, dismounted means you were on a foot patrol. So they told the family, from my understanding, that we were driving trucks and he got out of the truck to look at something and got hit by an IED. In reality, we were on a foot patrol trying to set up an ambush on the Taliban where we knew they were, and just crossed paths at the wrong time.
Damn, man. That's crazy. I could see, like, for someone that's outside of, like, your immediate chain of command, or not even at FOB Marjah or something like that, somewhere else where they can get confused, like, oh, he died from an explosion. Well, the automatic assumption is that it's an IED. It's because it's Afghanistan, so.
Yeah, there's 15 to 30 IEDs I hear go off every single day in Marjah.
Yeah. Fucking Marjah, man. I was at FOB Marjah for a little bit after you guys were there, so I know exactly what you were talking about, that area in the book. So we will back up. We'll come back to this. I do want to back up and talk about why'd you decide to join the Marine Corps?
Well, that's a long story. It wasn't just because I wanted a nice parking spot at Lowe's. But it probably started because I watched too much Top Gun as a teenager, and I was indoctrinated by the propaganda from the Bush administration era.
Yeah.
I graduated high school in 2006, and in 2006, my high school started a Marine Corps Junior ROTC program my senior year. So I started that, and being a senior for the first year, they put me in charge. I really liked it, and the instructor, Lieutenant Colonel Inners, told me about the officer candidate program for Marine officers. And I thought, well, that sounds pretty interesting. Being an officer, I was planning on going to college. So I talked to the Marine recruiter and I said, hey, I'm going to college. Is there a way that I can do this Marine thing as well? Go to officer candidate school? And he said, no, you don't want to go to college. You want to be Marine infantryman. And I said, no, I'm going to college. And he pulled out these little cards and he put them on his table, and they said things like justice and integrity and discipline. And he's like, pick 5 of these that are important to you. And I said, no, I don't want to talk about this. I'm willing to join the Marine Corps. Just tell me how to do that and college. He just told me I don't want to do that. I wanted to go Marine infantry enlisted. So I stopped talking to him because he clearly wasn't interested in listening to me or helping me. So I went to college. Orientation day, there was an Army officer, Major Gene Misdale, in his dress uniform behind the table with information and a roster to sign up for Army ROTC. So I'm like, oh, that sounds like a pretty good option. You know, get college paid for, become an officer, enlist. So I did that, or commission when you graduate. And in Army ROTC, there's this club called the Ranger Club that was students that competed against other ROTC schools. I was in the informal club, which was a drinking club.
Nice.
And I was at a house party one night with the Ranger Club cadets, the students, and a guy's roommate was also in ROTC, and he was a Marine. And I said, how are you in college and in the Marine Corps? And he said, I'm in the reserves, bro. So I learned that there's Marine Reserves that night. Still drunk the next day, called the recruiter and said, hey, I want to go to officer candidate school sophomore and junior summers. But this summer, after my freshman year, can I go to boot camp? And they said, sure. So the next day, the recruiter picked me up outside my dorm at 8 a.m, drove me 2 hours to MEPS while I filled out the security background in the back of his car and swore in that day because I got drunk at a house party.
That's super quick. Like you called him and he came and picked you up and took you right to MEPS. That's usually like it's not a 1-day process.
Well, I told him, I said, hey, I'm in college and I'm in ROTC and they're offering me a 3-year scholarship to contract with Army ROTC, and the Pennsylvania National Guard, they just offered me $30,000 to enlist and get paid as an E5 while I'm a student. And I realized that I was just kind of settling joining the Army, and for some reason I always wanted to be a Marine because I don't know.
They got good marketing.
I'm not the brightest.
They got the good marketing plan, man.
I wanted to fight dragons and lava monsters. I
think for the Marine Corps, a lot of people find that everyone knows that the boot camp is the hardest. Marine Corps boot camp is the hardest, right? You know, it's not. I mean, and the marketing and stuff that they do, you know, we don't offer you a rose, or we don't promise you a rose garden kind of attitude. Like, you're not here to get benefits, you're here to become a Marine kind of deal. I mean, there are benefits that come with it, but they don't even really. A lot of times they don't even use that. It's more of the challenge. And I think for a young man, a lot of young men want that challenge. You know, they want to go through something and be like, can I make it to the other end?
Yeah, for sure. I remember spending a lot of days standing in the rain doing the math of how much money and benefits I turned down from joining the Marine Corps instead of the Army. And, you know, early on, it didn't seem worth it, but it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the Marine Corps doesn't have, for those that don't know, the Marine Corps doesn't really have the bonuses and stuff that the Army does, but they do get all the same education benefits, and all the general benefits are the same. The thing where you get the big differences are the Army usually has more opportunities for enlistment bonuses and for re-enlistment bonuses when they're trying to fill a job. So, yeah. So you came in 2006 and they were trying to push you into infantry?
Yeah, the recruiter had done like 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Fallujah, and he looked like he was a linebacker for Green Bay or something. He was this huge dude, but I kind of think he might have been an ASVAB waiver. He wasn't all there.
Yeah.
And, you know, infantry sounded cool, but I was like, I'm going to college, and I found out later he just intentionally misled me. He didn't tell me there was such thing as the reserves. And I ended up going in this, I think it's called a 92-day reservist. So I only did my training during the summer. And the day after boot camp, I was back in college classes.
Yeah.
And so another year of college, and then MP school, and then college, and then MCT, and then some college in Marjah.
That's such a... I remember the 90-day reservist or whatever it is. I remember guys going through that, and they were saying that they're like, yeah, after boot camp, I just go back home and then I'll come back later. And I'm like, wait, that's so weird. Like, and it's got to be like a weird, I don't know, going from like boot camp one day to college the next day and then have to come back to MCT. Were you dreading coming back for your follow-on training?
So the way my unit did it was not the way the rest of the Marine Corps did it.
Okay.
They thought MP school was more valuable than MCT. So my second summer of the Marine Corps, I went to MP school in Fort Leonard for 11 weeks, then back to college. So by the time I went to MCT, I was already in the Marine Corps for over 2 years as, a somewhat senior Lance Corporal. And I got to be treated like I just graduated boot camp 10 days prior. And that was not a fun experience.
Yeah, that sucks. That would make me not see. I feel like it'd be hard to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the military, 1 foot in the Marine Corps, 1 foot out, like going back to college and stuff. That's such like change in lifestyles. I don't know how you can do that without there being some kind of issues,
Yeah. And there are a lot of issues. A lot of people have talked about that when I was serving, and our active duty counterparts acknowledged it, that, if you're active duty, you have one life to live. You're a Marine or a soldier or a sailor.
For sure.
But in the reserves, you have that same job and same career and same life, but then you have this separate civilian life with, your other career and education or whatever. And you don't get to just pause one when you want.
Mm-hmm.
They intermingle.
Yeah.
The more rank you pick up, the harder it is too.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, and I've known guys that were in the reserves and were like, I don't like this. I don't like playing, both sides here. I just want to be a Marine. And they will try to transfer from the Marines over to active duty, which is, I guess, kind of difficult on its own. But, man, that's crazy though. So when I got out, I considered going into the reserves. I think a lot of people do. You come off active duty. Mm-hmm. It seems like a really good transition. For me, I was a JTAC, so I could go to any one of the Anglicos and the reserve Anglicos, 4th, 6th, and 3rd, 4th, and 6th, and just be a JTAC for the rest of my career, be an Anglico guy for the rest of my career. But it was like, at the same time, I was planning on going to college when I got out, and I'm like, man, how much is the Marine Corps going to affect just my everyday life? Like, I'm doing this, I'm thinking about this as like a part-time thing and like kind of easing out of it. But it feels like if I go into the reserves and I'm going to college, like, what are the odds of me getting activated or something like that? And now I got to put school on hold, and that was kind of my concern. Does that make sense? Do you see how that's like a lot of guys coming off active duty wouldn't necessarily want to go do like a reserve tour?
Yeah, I was in the reserves for 6 years. I was always reserves.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of people come to our unit after active duty. Some of them, they were great. They had typically some sort of law enforcement civilian career, and then, drilled as an MP reservist. Mm-hmm. But I would say the majority of the active duty guys that switched into the reserves, they found it just too difficult, and they didn't really last more than a year because, unlike me, they had already done their time, and certain reserve contracts after active duty, they could get out of it when they wanted to.
Yeah, you can just kind of come and go as you want.
When you can go, like when it gets tough, they're like, yeah, I'm going to go. This is interfering with my family too much.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, that's my dad. My dad retired from the Army Reserves. He was active duty Army and then switched to reserves. And, he was always leaving for annual training. He deployed to the Gulf War, even as a reservist and stuff like that. So I remember how much it can still affect you. So when I was getting out, my thought process was, I just want to get away from all this. Like, I'm done working for the government. I'm done working for the man. I'm done having morons in charge of me. Not necessarily everyone, but you know how it is in the military. Sometimes there's someone that outranks you that's a moron. And now, just because of the luck of the draw that they outrank you, you have to listen to what they say. And you're like, this guy's making horrible decisions, but I can't do anything about it because he outranks me. And I was just like, dude, do I really want to have to worry about coming in and running a PFT? Do I really want to, sign in all the fucking bullshit, like to get my EO classes and everything else?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, man. That's the reserves is interesting. I had on my first deployment, I was a mechanic. I first came in, I was a mechanic, and then I moved to be an 0861. But when I came in and we deployed to Iraq, we had reservists with us from multiple units. They brought in like detachments from each of these reserve units to plus up our numbers. And it was really hit and miss about the quality of the reservist. You know, some of the guys were really good, and I was a mechanic again. Some guys were really good and kind of knew their job and, you know, were decent mechanics and stuff like that. And some dudes were like they had not even trained in the MOS at all. Like they didn't know anything, and it was like I was teaching someone that had never even picked up a wrench before, you know?
Yeah, so I was lucky. My unit was pretty high speed. We had a lot of combat vets in it from Iraq, then later Afghanistan. We had good leadership, and also just regionally. We were in Pittsburgh. I'm not a Pittsburgh native, but they just make people different there. And being an MP unit, that naturally meant about half of our company was professional law enforcement in some capacity.
Yeah.
And on average, the Marine reservists compared to their active duty counterpart, they're about 3 years older and typically have a higher level of education. So on average, that makes a different kind of professionalism. Mm-hmm. But like I said, my unit was really good. And then after I got out and some other people got out, went to different units, different branches, we get back together and they're like, hey, not all units were like ours. Like, there's a lot of them out there that kind of give the reputation of, you know, the dirtbag reservist.
Yeah.
But I've experienced that on active duty too. Like,
for sure,
being attached to different active duty units. Like, there's some that are like, these are the greatest Marines I've ever been with. Mm-hmm. And then there's others where it's like, I guess the reservists are going to have to teach the active duties how to be Marines.
Yeah. It's again, it's like very unit specific. I guess the mood of the unit can really drive the quality of the Marines that are in it. You know, like if they're focused on doing MOS specific training, doing training that's going to make them better at their jobs and stuff like that. I always tell people too, it's like, it's not always the reservist's fault. They have so much shit they got to cram in on that 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. You know, they have to do PFTs. They have to do all the annual training and stuff that we have to do. And all this other, so it's like swim qual. Like, I mean, how many of your reserve weekends are focused on just getting training checks in the box to get that stuff out of the way, and you're not even really doing a lot of your own job? You know, I mean, that happens. So it probably does make it easier in something like being an MP and half the people are already police officers, because there's a lot of crossover there. So that probably mechanics, I don't think a lot of the dudes were mechanics. I mean, we had guys that were like probation officers and stuff like that. They weren't very, so it's not like they're, oh, I'm not a Marine right now, but I'm still doing the job as a police officer or a mechanic. And, you know, they're doing something completely different. So I try to remind people of that too. Like, yeah, some of these guys suck, but that's not their fault. They don't know what they don't know, kind of deal. So, yeah.
And I'm sure it's different now with the, you know, the GWAT culture is a little bit, you know, yesterday's news, but I'm sure that affects the military, you know, across.
What do you mean? What do you mean by the GWAT culture?
You know, it's whenever the experience of, you know, the people constantly deploying and the high operational tempo, mm-hmm. I think you learn more about how to prepare for war, and 4 weeks in theater will teach you more than 3 years of stateside training.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, you can't replicate the reality of a deployment. I mean, we do all we can to make training as realistic as possible, and there's scenarios that are really realistic and stuff like that, but the reality on the ground is what it is. You can't replicate that specific scenario. Like, I don't know what's happening specifically in Marjah right now. I could probably give a good overview of some tactics you should use if you go to Afghanistan, but if you go to Marjah specifically, they may be doing something there completely different that I don't even know about, because we're so, you know, we're not in contact. It's like, I don't know anything about it, kind of deal. So yeah, man. Tell us about MP school. I think you're the first MP I've had on it, if I believe, or if I remember correctly.
Oh, that was an experience I'd like to forget.
Yeah.
It wasn't good. We had 3 instructors. 2 of them were sergeants, and they were both like field MPs and had fought in Iraq. And then the 3rd instructor was the staff sergeant, and he was garrison PMO his entire career.
Do you want to explain that real quick? A lot of people may not even know that.
I will love to do that. So the field MPs, I don't believe they exist anymore.
I don't think so either.
I think I got out in 2013. I think it was late 2012 that the Marine Corps said we're getting rid of them. So garrison MPs or PMO, that's the like the police officers, the law enforcement. I'm going to arrest you for DUI or getting in a barracks fight. The self-regulating law enforcement body of the Marine Corps. The field MPs, we never did the law enforcement stuff. It was convoy security operations, force protection operations, training local nationals for coin operations, counterinsurgency tactics, and short-term detainee operations and transporting prisoners and stuff. Because the Marine Corps has other people that are like jail guards, essentially.
Yeah. But
the field MPs were mainly, what do you do with these guys in a combat type environment, as opposed to policing your own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I was when I was a mechanic, I deployed in 2009 to Iraq. What would happen is with maintenance battalion is they would pull a certain group. They're like, hey, there's a deployment coming up. We're taking these 40 Marines from the motor transport maintenance company to go to Iraq as mechanics. And then we're like, okay, cool. And then from those 40, they would pull like 15 out of that and go, hey, you 15 aren't going to be mechanics. You 15 are going over with the MPs and you're going to be convoy security. And they would plus up their numbers. They'd go over and do, machine gun training, convoy security training, stuff like that, and get pulled into that. So a very important job and a pretty dangerous job being convoy security in Iraq or Afghanistan, because the whole deal is you're probably the first vehicle and most likely to get hit by an IED.
Yeah, I missed out on the Iraq train by about a year, but when I joined my unit, those guys had just gotten back, so I'm like the boot PFC Lance Corporal standing at parade rest for these Saudi Lance Corporals that had just served, in Iraq combat security, and from my understanding is, they got some there. It was a hot environment and running operations all day long.
Yeah.
But,
it's a crazy job. I mean, I would have much rather have done it than being a mechanic sitting on base the whole time, because you're actually out in the country and doing stuff, but it's definitely, a dangerous gig. So you said half the people in your unit were law enforcement professionals in other careers. What did those people think about the MP school? Did they think it was comparable to like police academies or the training? Like, how did they compare those?
Oh, I don't know. But MP school is just kind of, I remember it as being just a giant haze fest.
Oh, really?
Checks and boxes. We'd see the Army guys go through their MP school, and I think our instructors just wanted to treat us worse, just to show how tough we were. I never ran so much in my life as I did in MP school, because apparently their thought was, oh, you're going to be police officers, and you need to be stronger and faster than every Marine in the Marine Corps so you can catch them and arrest them. They had us running, 25 miles a week, and until everybody got shin splints and neuropathy in their feet and everything else. But it was okay. The only parts of it that I enjoyed were like the week or 2 weeks we spent in the field. But then it goes back to the staff sergeant instructor that was PMO, and he told us we weren't allowed to use our slings for our weapons. So all of our rifles, we didn't have slings because he said slings make you lazy. And I said every Marine since World War I has had a sling on their rifle.
Bunch of lazy fucks.
Yeah. So
that's
it's hard
funny.
doing mountain operations without a sling.
It's very frustrating when you're doing something that is complete nonsense. You're like, what are we doing here? This is a waste of my fucking time. Like, this is a waste of your time. This is a waste of my time. That's the kind of stuff that drives people to get out. Like, it's cool to be like, we're hardcore and, we train harder and we do this. But a lot of times people, like you're saying, like instructors or people in charge will take that to another level because they want to show how cool they are, how hardcore they are, or their dudes are. And it's like, dude, you're not doing anything that's making you tactically more proficient. You know, all you're doing is maybe making you less proficient because your dudes are injured now, you know, and like it's, I don't know. I understand like the hazing culture, I guess. I understand where some of it comes from, but I don't agree with a lot of it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
And then for people that don't know what I'm talking about, there's a lot of like hazing in the Marine Corps and the military in general. I think it was after Anglico and Recon got in trouble with their gold wing, like smashing their gold wings into their chest, that hazing became like a real forefront of everything. It came out on the news. There was like a tape got released showing them getting their gold jump wings jammed into their chest. Other things that happen are like blood stripes when you pick up corporal. So you pick up corporal and all the other corporals and NCOs come over and knee you in the leg, and you have just total dead legs. I remember that was like the worst. And I remember after I picked up corporal, like a month later, my buddy picked up corporal, and I was like, oh shit, you get your blood stripes. And I remember I kneed him once, man, and he almost passed out. Like, and he's just, I don't know. I kneed him, and he like went completely white and like sat down, and I thought he was going to pass out, and I felt like such a piece of shit. And that was like the last time I did something like that. I was like, dude, my bad, man. I'm such a dick for even doing that, you know? It's guys take it too far, right? I mean, like what's supposed to be like a nice rite of passage or whatever becomes craziness that guys take too far and dudes get injured, and like someone has to be accountable for it and stuff like that. So there's a fine line between like good hard training and like hazing, you know?
Yeah. With this staff sergeant in particular, at MP school, he was going through a rather nasty divorce at the time.
Yeah.
And I remember him just going off. Like, it was just me and another instructor in his office, because he told me to come in and sweep his office. Mm-hmm. And the other instructor's like, this is making me uncomfortable. Can you please not do this in front of us? And, we have our end of course evaluations. And the result of that was the staff sergeant had to get evaluated by a psychiatrist.
Well, that's good. I mean,
yeah. So hopefully he got the help he needed, but he took it out on us.
That sucks. I remember being in boot camp. My senior drill instructor at some point became like, usually the senior drill instructor is a dick, but they're less of a dick a lot of times because they're that kind of father figure. And like somewhere like halfway into boot camp, he just turned it on. It became this like super dick. And we're like, what the fuck? Like we were all like, what the fuck is going on with senior drill instructor? And then at some point during like I think the end of second phase, we found out he was going through a divorce. I don't know how we found out. I don't know if he told us or someone told us, but we found out he was going through a divorce, and we're like, that's why he's fucking with us. That's why he's being such a dick right now, because he's taking his stress out on us, which is not the right thing to do. But
yeah, it happens.
What was the most fun part about like MP school? Did you guys get to like tase each other, doing the pepper spray and all that? Not that those are fun, but
yeah, we did the pepper spray. You get sprayed, you have to say how many fingers they're holding up, and do this whole course where you have to, hit someone with batons and then arrest two people and then do some judo moves on somebody else while sprayed. I was the last person to go, so nobody could see how cool I was. But that wasn't enjoyable either. The showers afterwards were less enjoyable because it kind of runs down. But I've never had it done. I've never done the pepper spray.
Don't do it. I knew a gunny who was like, it makes you want to die. He goes, the feeling is I want to die right now. I'd rather be dead than this burning in my face. He's like, and then like you said, it'll go away, and then a few hours later you'll start sweating or something like that, and then it all comes back again.
Yeah, so the Marine Corps is always full of all these stories of, boot camp's so tough, the crucible's so tough, the gas chamber's so tough, and then you do it, and it's like, no, that gas chamber's super easy.
Yeah.
The crucible wasn't hard. Everybody talks about how everything's so bad. I would say the only thing that is as bad as people say it was the OC spray at MP school. That's
hilarious. That dude I was talking about was like sadistic or something too, because he would always volunteer to do it, even though he knew how bad it was. He had it done like 4 or 5 times. I'm like, Why? What are you doing?
Leading from the front, I guess. Right?
I guess, I guess. I used to go, you know, well, so on Camp Pendleton and Camp Lejeune, they do this thing called Marine West and Marine East Expo, and it's where people within the industry, it's almost like a mini SHOT Show at Pendleton and at Lejeune. And you go in and you see all this new equipment, all this new gear, different attachments and optics and vehicles and all this other stuff. And there's always a booth set up with people with like tasers and stuff like that. And if you ever go to one, you can literally stand 20 feet from that booth and watch groups of Marines come around and challenge each other to get tased. And it's always hilarious because it's a group will come over, talk shit to each other like, no, you do it. Yeah, I bet you won't. And then you watch a guy get tased, laugh, have a good time. They leave, and then another group comes around the corner, and it just repeats itself. It's one of those things. I don't know why people volunteer to go do it, but it's for some reason they do,
That sounds like a Lance Corporal thing.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much. Yeah, there's not too many like lieutenant colonels, egging each other on to get tased and stuff. I mean, do you think as a MP guy imagine going through that school and you were not a reservist, you're active duty and now you're sent to like Camp Lejeune and now you're PMO. Do you think those guys are prepared to be PMO as soon as they get there? Or is there probably a lot of OJT going on?
It's going to be a lot of OJT.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, it's just like, I'm sure any other school, like, are you a full-on rifleman after SOI, or do you need your guys in the fleet to tell you how we really do things?
Mm-hmm.
It gives them the basics. Basically trained MP. Enough qualifications to give them their belt with their pistol, I suppose.
Which is crazy though. You like you still need training, but you're a 19-year-old dude or girl or whatever. MP. Here's your belt and here's your gun and your handcuffs. We're about to send you out on Camp Lejeune to take care of domestic violence or something like.
Yeah.
I don't know. That just seems wild to me.
Yeah, I'm sure there's OJT going on. I mean, just like civilian law enforcement, they do their academy. They don't cut them loose.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I never did PMO.
Yeah.
But,
that's probably a good thing though. Yeah, and I think you're right. You were saying before that they got rid of the field MPs. I think at around that time frame you're talking about, 2013, that's when they created the law enforcement battalions. And they moved everyone away from, because there was like MLG. I think there were MPs that were part of MLG, and then MPs that were part of division. And the division MPs were the field MPs that went out and did like the convoy security. I believe. I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, we had 3 MP reserve companies, and they were under 4th MLG. And then right as I was getting out, they formed the 4th Law Enforcement Battalion, which is under 4th Marine Division.
Yeah.
I don't know where the active duty counterparts are, but they started to get rid of them. I remember at MP school, there was one guy, he was former Army Staff Sergeant. He had like 2 Purple Hearts. He fought in Fallujah with the Marines as an Army detachment. He got busted down in rank for striking a commissioned officer. And he's like, well, my career in the Army's over. So he joined the Marine Corps as an E2.
That's crazy.
And when they came down to like the draft selection for like who's going where after MP school, like the reservist, my spot was secured. Like they couldn't tell me where I was going to go. But all the active duty guys, they're like, oh, you're going to this base to do PMO. And there's like one place where there was field MPs. And I remember he was like threatening to just kill everybody if he didn't go to the field unit. Like he wanted it that bad. He didn't want to be like the super pogue. Yeah.
That's probably not a good person to be a MP at all. Jeez.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was a little nuts, but he was a good dude.
It was always weird. I remember in boot camp, we had a guy that had come from the Army and a guy that had come from the Navy to join the Marines. And for those that don't know, like if you join from another force, from the Air Force, Army, Navy, when you come in as a private, and then maybe you get a PFC automatic promotion for whatever, but it doesn't matter what rank you were before. You're coming in from the beginning, from the bottom. And I remember the Navy guy, I think he was a corpsman maybe or something like that, but he had more ribbons than our like drill instructors and stuff, you know, when we would do our uniform inspections, because he'd been in for so long. And it's like, you know, why? Why did you leave that and come over here? Like, I don't understand, but I guess it's the same way when you see people that do lap moves and stuff like that switch jobs. People are like, why would you come over here? This is not, you know, this isn't it.
Yeah. Do this first, then do something nice.
Yeah. I mean, or just get out, man. You know, like if you had your fill of the Army or whatever, get out. I don't know. Some people just love it though. Some people love deploying and doing all that stuff. Yeah, man. When you were at your unit, so what was the actual unit?
It was MP Company B, Bravo, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Okay. When you guys would meet up, and what kind of training were you guys doing outside of like the normal annual training stuff?
You know, we do our normal annual stuff of, you know, sexual harassment training, swim qual, rifle qual, and all that. But they would put us out in a field in West Virginia or Ohio or Pennsylvania or somewhere. And we'd either do machine gun shoots, heavy weapons, with mock, you know, convoy stuff through the forests, a lot of foot patrol training, you know, just basic rifleman training. And sometimes we'd set up like fake detainee facilities of vehicle control points, entry control points. So it might be a 3-4 day weekend, and we have this fake facility where we're going to handle and temporarily hold detainees that another squad is out training and doing foot patrols, and they capture somebody, bring them in, and there's another squad training doing convoys. So it would mix all these different things up in one, and it would be like a round robin. You'd spend 12, 16 hours on one with, you know, 6 hours of sleep a night. You know, most of the time it's more like 4. They're supposed to give you sleep, but when you have a limited amount of time to do as much training as you can, training is the more important thing. I remember talking about it years ago with my comrades, like, you know, the crucible at boot camp is supposed to be this hard thing for these recruits to do. And I don't think I ever had a field drill weekend that was easier than the crucible. Like our drill weekends were pretty tough a lot of times, which sounds kind of like a weird thing to say. It's just 4 days, but they cram a lot of stuff in 4 days or 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
And being in Pennsylvania, it's half the time it's snow outside, and we're sleeping in the snow, and we get to check another box saying we did cold weather training, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of machine gun shoots, a lot of detainee type ops.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
I don't think that's a surprise, though, saying that it's harder than the crucible, because a lot of times you'll hear people say, like, this isn't the hardest thing you're ever going to do. Like, this is...
No.
At that may be the hardest thing that a lot of kids have done to that point in their lives, but the expectation is that it's going to keep going, man. You know, and really, for those that haven't done it, the hardest part for the crucible for a lot of people is the hike. And really, if you're pretty well conditioned, the hike isn't that bad. You know, I mean, it's a long. I don't remember how long exactly it is, but it's a decent distance with decent weight, but nothing crazy. And I think even in MCT, I think the hikes are even longer there. So, I don't know. I that's not surprising, I guess. I've done a lot of stuff, I think, in training that was probably also, you know, harder than the crucible, or even overseas, obviously. Some of that shit's crazy too. So, did you think that the training you were doing was properly preparing you to do your job?
Yeah, I think it taught me to work with my team, my squad. You know, I got pretty good at shooting machine guns from this training that we did. Mm-hmm. Even though unlike, you know, active duty, where you can get, I don't know, I'm assuming if you're active duty, you get to shoot heavy weapons, you know, every month or two, where in the reserves, we shot heavy weapons maybe twice a year.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And we did a lot of mount training too, stuff like that.
Yeah. MOUT is the military operations in urban terrain, For those
Yeah,
that don't know.
sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. No, so
Um,
active duty machine gun shoots aren't that often. I mean, maybe I don't. I guess I'm speaking out of turn because I don't really know how the MP schedule on it, but I do know we would like at Anglico we had machine guns and we would do a few shoots a year. Probably more than just a few, but definitely not once a month or twice a month. You know, you have the same stuff that you. The problem on active duty is that you're expected to do all kinds of training, and then you get pulled for other stuff for like events and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot. It's a whole different world kind of deal. So I guess that's probably a misconception a lot of people have is that you get to shoot a ton when you're. I remember, so as a mechanic, I remember, and I've told this story multiple times. When I was a mechanic at maintenance battalion, I didn't even have a rifle assigned to me. The only time I had a rifle assigned to me was when I went to the rifle range. I'd go get a rifle card, a temporary rifle card, get a rifle assigned to me, go shoot, come back, turn that rifle in, and I would never see it again and go back to being a mechanic because that was my job. You know, it wasn't, they're like, well, who do you think you're fucking infantry? You don't need a fucking, you know, like, what? We're not going to go out to the field and do foot patrols. You turn wrenches, dude, you know, pull that engine out kind of deal. So, at what point were you starting to get tapped for your deployment? I mean, how long were you there before the cycle came up to you? You know, it was your turn.
Well, it was summer of 2009, and I was at MCT, Marine Combat Training, and I think it was Camp Geiger, maybe.
Yeah.
And we weren't allowed to have our cell phones, and this is, you know, flip phone days. And we had like 5 minutes. They gave us 5 minutes to call somebody. So instead of calling my family, I called my team leader. I said, hey, what's going on? Because I got a voicemail saying they're ramping up for a deployment to Afghanistan. I was like, I want to get on that. And I was like, I need more time. I need to call my my chain of command, let them know I want to deploy. And the combat instructor said, no, your time's up. But I left a real quick voicemail saying, yes, I absolutely want to go. Then graduation day, I got the voicemail saying I've been selected. So that was August, maybe 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like they were taking a platoon from my company, about 40 submarines, to augment another MP company that was doing a company-wide deployment. My company, it's like, you know, their first time going to Afghanistan. So their rationale was we're going to pick the best of the best that we have. So I think I mentioned it in my book that like I was one of very few people that wasn't a NCO that deployed. Mm-hmm. They took all the NCOs that they thought were good. And after that, they did a draft, basically. You had to have a high first-class PFT, and you had to have an expert rifle qual. If you didn't have that, you weren't going on the deployment. And they picked people that they thought were people they could rely upon, that were proficient at their job. And they had that group of people, and then they're like, hey, most of these guys deploying are going to be out of the Marine Corps within a year of coming back. So then they got a bunch of boot drops to, you know, fill in extra people so we have experience for building the company in the future. So that was summer. And then December, we go to Quantico Viper in Camp Upshur and did our pre-deployment training. And second to last day in Camp Upshur before the double 96 for the holidays, Christmas and New Year's, they said, the deployment's canceled. The MP company's not deploying anymore. And my captain, and we had a captain with us, and he said, no, I got 40 submarines here that are completely qualified, checked all the boxes, they're ready to go. So they started calling headquarters of the Marine Corps, 3rd Marines, 2nd Marines, everybody to say, hey, we got 40 guys ready to go. We need a mission. Mm-hmm. And eventually they found a company, or a battalion actually, in Cherry Point that could use an extra 40 people because they were short on numbers. And so we attached with them, and that was 2nd LAD, low altitude air defense guys.
Yeah. 2nd LAD, huh? That's another thing too. Like when I deployed in 2009, we had a ton of reservists attached to us as supplemental guys. And then when we got to the actual like deployment date, they were like, hey, we have too many people. So they started cutting people off the deployment. But because there's something with activating reservists and stuff like that. Once they're activated, there's like certain protocols that have to happen. None of the reservists could be taken off the deployment. They only took active duty guys off the deployment. We had reservists and we had guys that were recalls. There was like 4 or 5 guys in my unit that had been recalled from the civilian world. And then when they were like, hey, we have too many people here, they let the active duty guys go back to their units, and the recall dudes were like, what the fuck? Like, this is bullshit. Like, I was in college.
That's rough.
Yeah, so it's a weird game, man, when they start filling in spots for deployments and stuff like that. So what was LAD doing? Why'd you guys get attached to them?
I ask myself that every day for 14 years.
That's the infantry of the air wing. If you don't
they
know.
call themselves the Wingfantry. That's what they write on the inside of the Porta-John walls.
That's hilarious.
The Wingfantry was here. They were slated to do some sort of force protection mission, guarding a base, standing towers, and we were pretty disappointed to hear that. That's not what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We had bad experiences being attached to them, but it was our only means to get into Afghanistan. So, Lance Corporal does as he's told, right? So we fly and we get there, and I'd say within 10 minutes or so of landing in Afghanistan, we were told that we're not going to be with Second Lad anymore. And it was just the biggest relief we ever had. We didn't get along with them. It was just an interesting culture shock being attached to that unit.
I feel like you're putting this nicely. I feel like you're being nice about it.
I am. I have some videos on my Instagram documenting our time with LAD, if anybody's interested.
I'll have to take a look.
For example, we're in a battalion formation, and their battalion commander, I think he was a major at the time, he just comes out and starts screaming at his battalion, saying that they didn't take the command climate survey seriously, and that they lied about it because there was like 10 Marines that said that they had been sexually harassed in the workplace. And he's like, you're all Marines. There's no females here. Male Marines cannot be sexually harassed. And like, I remember just looking to the guy next to me who's, a lawyer in the civilian world. And I was like, that's illegal what he just said, right? He's like, yep.
Was that dude an enlisted guy also, the lawyer?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So that's the reserves. Like, you get all sorts of people. We had lawyers and carpenters and jail guards and police officers. Yeah. Everybody has a second skill set. But then we eventually got the Leatherneck. We were in like Kandahar for like 3 days, and we get the Leatherneck. We're like, well, we're here, but we don't have a mission. So the CO and the gunny, they go out and they start talking to people. And eventually one of the generals found out that there was 40 some military police officers that didn't have a mission. And this brand new mission that I think it was McChrystal was pushing was this police mentor team thing. Nobody knew what it was. They're like, you guys are going to be police mentors. And we're like, okay, I don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. And they broke us up into 5 teams. 3 in Marjah, 1 in Musa Kala, and 1 in Nowzad.
Yeah.
So we disbanded and didn't see each other for quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a big push. I was in 13. I got attached to an advisor team for the Afghan National Army, and while we were doing our training, we had a police mentor team that was also training up with us that were going to also be in Sangin, but they'd be working with the local police force and stuff like that. That's kind of crazy that they sent you there and then made you guys. I mean, that's advisor being a military advisor or foreign military advisor normally has its own like full training, like 6 months of training, of language training, customs and courtesies, instruction, how to teach these guys how to do stuff and stuff. So it's kind of crazy you guys got pulled to do that right out the gate without any of that kind of prior training,
Yeah. It ended up being pretty cool mission, pretty high speed. But it was what 30,000 troops pushed into Afghanistan within 2 months, and they had this new mission with nobody to do it, and they said, "Oh, hey, we don't want cooks or infantrymen to do this job when we have 40 MPs ready to do it."
For sure.
So
no, it makes sense. It makes sense. What did you think about the Afghan police force when you guys got to Marjah?
The first mission I had was to go evaluate the Afghan Civil Order of Police, the ANCOP, at a certain location, and that was where 1-6 Bravo Company was at the pork chop in Marjah. And I'm evaluating them, and it's like they're raping boys, they're stealing stuff. Not the greatest thing. And we sent the report up, and we were told by the generals that, well, certain levels of bad things are acceptable. It's what it is.
Yeah.
But then by the time that I was to do the mission and actually be embedded with them, that company of ANCOP policemen had left and went back to Kabul, and a new company came. And I think I had built a good rapport with them, and we had good relations. And for the most part, they were pretty professional. The ANCOP, so people know, they are the national police force. Their job is to quell counterinsurgency. They were all veterans. All their officers had fought the Russians and had the scars to prove it. And they were good to have in a fight, for sure. And then later on my deployment, the last half of my deployment, I worked with a different police force, the Afghan National Police, or the Afghan Uniformed Police. Mm-hmm. And they were more of a local police force. They were guys that, just went through the training at Camp Leatherneck. We gave them a rifle, gave them a uniform, and
they were the ones that wore the blue uniforms, right?
Yeah, they both wore blue. They just had different patches and different things on their shoulders.
Okay. Yeah, because so for those that haven't been there, there's multiple levels of police there. There's the ALP, the Afghan Local Police, the AUP, the Afghan Uniform Police, the ANCOP, which is what you said, the Afghan, was it National?
Afghan National Civil Order of Police. And then there's also the ANP, which is the Afghan National Police or something.
Yeah, super confusing. And all different levels of capabilities. And the ALP, the Afghan Local Police, were basically militia guys. I mean, they weren't even in uniforms and shit. You'd see a vehicle cruising down the street with barrels of guns sticking out the window and be like, oh shit, is that Taliban? Then oh no, it's the ALP. Definitely interesting times for sure.
Most of the officers or the commanders were motivated, good guys. The ANCOP enlisted were good. It was the local police enlisted that you're lucky if you get them to show up on a patrol with their boots on or their helmet on. Mm-hmm. But it's baby steps, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's and I want to go back to the corruption that you were talking about. I mean, as an advisor, that was something we were, faced with as well. And we were told there has to be part of their culture. That's just part of their culture. Some of this corruption is just part of their culture, and they would say, one thing they would always say is there's an Afghan solution to an Afghan problem. You know what I'm saying? They'd be like, that's an Afghan solution. We'd be like, we'd complain about something. They're like, that's an Afghan solution to an Afghan problem. It's not our place to come in and change their culture. That we're just here to train them and tell them what they should do tactically and stuff like that. They're doing all this other stuff. As long as it's not crazy, egregious, and you don't see it, then, what are you going to do? And that was kind of when the war ended and the place fell really quickly. I wasn't surprised because I knew, because having been an advisor, I was like, there's so much corruption. There's not only just corruption, but and I don't mean necessarily corruption at the lowest levels either. There's corruptions throughout the entire thing, which means that the guys at the lowest level, may not be getting the pay that they're supposed to get, may not be getting the equipment that they're supposed to get, or the food that they're supposed to get. So when the country's all falling, and you are asking a guy that has one magazine of ammo to defend Marjah, who hasn't really eaten anything but rice in the last couple days, like, he's not going to. When the Taliban rolls up and goes, hey, you can either put your arms down and live, or we're going to kill you. What would you do? If you have a family and stuff like that, what are you going to do? Because you're going to die when you only have a magazine's worth of ammo, because the corruption is so bad that the higher ups that are getting the ammo, they're supposed to be sourcing the ammo for their people, are turning around and selling it, or their uniforms or whatever. It wasn't uncommon to find army and police uniforms in bazaars for sale because guys would sell them to make money. So that doesn't surprise me. What you're saying about the corruption. I would say the child rape thing, for the most part, was, from what I saw, was pretty frowned upon, even from the Afghans. It was like one of those things that you knew happened sometimes, the chai boy kind of stories. But it seemed like most of the Afghans, if they found out, actually, I think it happened one time, they found out one of their police officers had been raping some kid, they beat the fuck out of him. It was not. So I don't want to make it sound like they were all like, yeah, let's rape kids. Because it definitely wasn't like that.
Definitely weren't. That would not have happened with the ANCOP that I actually worked with. It was the people that they replaced. Did that, and that was just a couple of bad actors. But I think I only experienced maybe 2 times where I didn't support the policemen and what they wanted to do. Mm-hmm. One time it caused some bad relations with the Afghan commander and my team leader because we got called out because the 1-6 Bravo guys, they had just gotten a real bad firefight. And one of the infantrymen, he was pointing at the Afghan policeman and said, he called the Taliban and he told him we were here, and then they set up an ambush on us. I heard him on his cell phone. He was convinced that this police officer just sold him out to the Taliban. And I said, did he get shot at too? And he's like, yeah, but come on, man. So I was like, well, let's just settle this. Let's search his phone. So the police commander searched his phone begrudgingly, and we absolved him. Of course, this guy still has really high tensions because he just got shot at in a real nasty firefight. So the Marine was not happy still, but we're like, look, he didn't call the Taliban. We don't have any evidence of this. We just searched all his stuff, and he also got shot at right next to you. But because we searched his phone and we didn't trust the police commander on his word, that really hurt our relationship.
Yeah.
The second time was the local bread maker got threatened by the Taliban to stop making bread. And the police commander said, well, we're going to go arrest him and beat him up if he doesn't start making bread, because he's not allowed to back down to the Taliban. And I said, I read the Afghan constitution a couple of times when I first landed in Marjah, so I could understand it. And I was like, you can't do this. This is illegal. You can't go arrest a guy because he doesn't want to make bread. Mm-hmm. And I said, the Marines are having no part in this. If you do this, you're doing this without Marine support. So he was pretty upset with me. But I ate bread the next day. So
did they actually go beat the shit out of the dude for not making bread?
They just threatened him. They said they're going to arrest him.
That
if
poor
he didn't
bastard.
Start making bread.
That poor bastard's
yeah, he's getting threatened
threats
by the Taliban and the police.
Yeah, man. That's it, man. That's the craziness. It's sad that the politicians never heard these kind of stories and stuff, because then they wouldn't have wasted so much fucking time in Afghanistan. They'd have been like, oh, we got bin Laden. It's over. That's it. All right, let's get everybody out of here. It's your guys' show now. Because that's the kind of corruption. It's like you're forcing a local dude to choose between getting his ass kicked by the Taliban or his ass kicked by the police, who are supposed to be protecting him, kind of deal. I mean,
yeah.
Oh man,
it was crazy. The same thing with the Marines too. We'd go do our foot patrols and we'd walk and talk to a local and be like, hey, how can we help you? Where are the Taliban? We'll go kill them if you tell us where they are. And the story was always the same. Like, they watched you come into my house. They're watching you talk with me. Yeah, you can keep me safe right now, but in 10 minutes, you may not be here. In 2 hours, you may not be here. In 2 days, you may not be here. So that was always really hard to try to build relations and trust, and then also try to provide some sort of security with the Taliban who roam the area freely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and they would also, did you guys ever see any cases where they would distribute those like night letters is what we called them? They would go around and put like almost like propaganda leaflets, you know, and it was basically like, help the Americans, we're going to kill you, da-da-da-da kind of deal.
I haven't seen that, but I did see them execute people. They just take them and kill them.
Yeah.
If they helped us or if they're friends with us. Happened a few times. So.
That's crazy, dude. I don't remember seeing anything like that when I was there.
Yeah,
I'm sure it happened, but
I don't know if you ever saw the Battle of Marjah by HBO.
I don't think I've actually seen that. No.
There's they had a film crew with the 1-6 Bravo company guys when they first got in there, and then they came back in about May. But early on in February, they're interviewing some Afghans, and there's this little guy, a dwarf. He was 29 years old, and he's telling the camera crew, they translate it, that, like, we don't want you here. We are fine with the Taliban. Like, now we're not safe because you're making conflict. I don't know his name, but I used to hang out with his older brother, who was also a dwarf, and he was 49. I'd have breakfast with him almost every day with the police commander. And he told us some stories about, like, he was kidnapped the day before when I was having breakfast with him by the Taliban. This low-level Taliban picked him up, took him to the Taliban leader after he left our police station. And it's like, this guy, he's a police officer. I just captured a police officer. He's always going in and out of their police station. And the Taliban leader's like, no, you're an idiot. He's too small. He can't even pick up a rifle. The guy weighed about 20 pounds, to put it in perspective.
Oh, really?
And, yeah, real small. I got some videos of him posted on my social media.
That's crazy small. Jesus.
Yeah, crazy small. And he said, well, if he was a police officer, he'd be able to have a rifle, but they won't make anybody a police officer that can't hold a rifle. So they put a loaded Kalashnikov on the ground in front of him and told him to shoot the low-level Taliban guy that captured him, and he couldn't even pick up the rifle. So he's like, see, you're an idiot. He's not a police officer. And they let him go. Jeez. And then I had breakfast with him the next day.
And he told you that story?
Yeah. Yeah.
What were you thinking as he's telling you this?
It was just surreal. That wasn't the first time he was kidnapped either. So
that's, again, I mean, so when I was in Sangin in 2013, we had Sergeant Major Hassan, who was the Sergeant Major of the Afghan National Army in the area, and he's an old Mujahideen guy as well. He spoke English pretty well as well. You know, I could sit there and have a conversation with him without a linguist, which was cool. And about, I think, 2/3 through our deployment or something like that, maybe a little farther, his son had been captured by Taliban at a checkpoint. They set up checkpoints on the roads, for those that don't know. And they killed him. And the last thing we did before we left Sangin was he asked us to get him a flight to, I think, Leatherneck or somewhere else. He was basically trying to get back home, but he knew if he drove, he would die on the way. He would get captured and get killed on the way. And he was a high-value target because he was a sergeant major of a unit in Sangin, and there was a lot of fighting there, obviously. So that was like the last thing we did. But I remember thinking, like, man, like, what a crazy life that you're living where you can't even drive down the streets or whatever without, you know, possibly running into one of these checkpoints and getting rolled up and then fucking executed, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. So let's talk about, what did like a average mission with the Afghan police look like?
It was kind of like a crawl, walk, run phase, right? The Marines would plan the mission, we would walk through, we would conduct it, and it would be one of a couple things. Generally, it would be just a patrol. Either we'd go to a local place, patrol around the bazaar, search around it, do satellite patrols around the main patrol area, or we'd go out to a police checkpoint, do satellite patrols around the police checkpoint, or we'd go in and talk to locals, see what they need. Most of it was just general presence, foot patrol kind of things. Occasionally we would have, based on the intel they would get, we would do counter narcotics or counter weapons raids, which were interesting. And then we roll in a little heavier for those. But our missions were typically, I was a 4-man team for the first half of my deployment. So it'd be 4 Marines and 6, maybe 8 police officers. And we would just walk around, see what happens. But then later, my teams merged and we would have more Marines. So we'd have 6 to 8 Marines and about 8 police officers and go out.
Were you only going out with the Afghan police, or were you doing like joint patrols with like the Marine infantry and stuff?
Sometimes. So one of the squads in 16 Bravo Company, they had like 2 trucks, and you needed 4, I think, at the time to go outside the wire. And we had 2 Humvees, and we were walking everywhere, and we couldn't get to all of our police checkpoints because we'd be walking on super dangerous areas for very long distances. So we partnered with them, and they would drive us out, and they would sit and park, and we would do our missions. If it was something bigger, like, hey, we think there's IEDs here, we would go out sometimes with our police officers and Afghan National Army and the EOD. Sometimes CIA, not CIA, and DEA and other governmental agency operatives would come to us and be like, hey, I need to go talk to an informant in this village. Can you take 10, 15 police officers out there and just pretend like you're doing something while they go and talk to their person? We did that quite a bit too.
Yeah. Those strange people that only go by one first name that sometimes changes. Run into.
Yeah.
No name tapes on their uniforms and stuff. No rank. Yeah.
Yep.
This was around the same time as Moshtrock was going on. Did you guys get there before the big push, or was it already going on, or was it already completed? Like, how did that look?
Mushtarak launched, I think, February 14th.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the sky over Europe, landing in Manas, Kyrgyzstan on February 14th. Then we got the Leatherneck, and while they were trying to figure out what we're going to do, we volunteered to help with the base security there, which was probably a stupid idea. But I spent about 3 weeks doing towers and entry control points and searching trucks on Leatherneck. So by the time I got to Marjah, it was mid to late March, I believe.
Okay.
So I was there from March until September.
Okay.
So, and personally, I was in central Marjah for most of that.
For the tower security thing at Leatherneck, I want to touch on that real quick. What did you think about the security of the towers and stuff like that? Because a few years later, or actually like a year later, yeah, it was attacked, right?
Yeah, we had Bahrainis, I think, there that were gifted to the coalition by the king, and they weren't allowed to die, so they couldn't do anything more dangerous than stand towers. And Jordanians, I think.
Interesting.
I don't know. You're just looking at a desert and there's nothing there. I didn't take it very seriously. Should I have? Probably.
Well, one thing that blew my mind was when I was there in 2011, I went to Leatherneck for like a fires conference or something like that. And I remember jumping on one of the buses, because this is for those that don't know, Leatherneck is pretty big, and it's connected. It's like Leatherneck and Bastion, which is the British side or whatever. And it's a big airfield and all that stuff. So it's a pretty big base. And I remember jumping on one of the buses, and we were cruising the perimeter, heading out to somewhere. And it was like almost none of the towers had people in them. I'm like, they're like silhouettes and shit. And I remember I got yelled at for having the day I got there, for having a magazine in my weapon, for not clearing my rifle. And I'm like, I just came out of Marjah. I was at FOB Marjah. Yeah. And I'm like, what? Like, this is crazy. And then after I left and went back to Marjah a few months later, Bastion was attacked, or maybe the next year, Bastion was attacked. And then when I came back in 2013 for my advisor team tour, like Leatherneck was completely different. Everyone was walking around, with a Condition 3 weapon. There were more people in the towers. There was the area that had been attacked by the airfield was way more secure. They had like bunkers basically set up, like machine gun bunkers and stuff. Like, it was kind of crazy that it wasn't that fortified from the get-go. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, the fighting positions were there. I just think the mentality was, who's going to do a frontal assault on a giant base the size of a city?
Yeah, well,
so,
we found out, and we lost a few aircraft and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was interesting. My old air officer, when I was at Anglico, his Harrier is one of the ones that got blown up. He was there when all the shit was happening, and like, he was talking about it firsthand, his firsthand account of it. And I'm like, man, that's just so crazy that, a handful of guys, I think it was like 10 or 12 people, were able to breach the wire and do what they were. It's not crazy, but it also is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Back to Marjah though. What'd you think about FOB Marjah?
I landed in a Super Stallion, I think, right in the poppy field, right outside the wall. And it's like, how do we get in? Somebody just moved a piece of plywood, and that was the gate. It got built up a lot, I think, as I was there. Mm-hmm. They started putting they had the CBs come in, start putting tents up and stuff like that. But when I first got there, it was just sunshades. It was a big place. We got rocketed a few times. It wasn't too serious. It got a little weird later on when 2-6 took over. It was very strict. We got yelled at. Like, we had to do basically a combat patrol from the district center to FOB Marjah to get our mail. And that's the only reason we would go there. And we would get, hey, Marine, where's your 8-point cover? And I'm like, I'm on patrol. I'm not your Marine.
Like, they would really?
Yeah. I got threatened with NJPs, court martials, all sorts of stuff because my sleeves were rolled. Our magazines were inside. Fingers were cut off gloves. I had a bracelet on that my girlfriend made.
I bet you were wearing white socks too, you piece of shit.
Briefly, because I had no socks. And I asked my dad to mail me socks. And he mailed me some white tube socks. And then later we went into FOB Marjah, and I had a clipboard, and we're just like, take one of those, and just walked out with socks and underwear and magazines. Because if we asked, they wouldn't have given them to us.
That's for the uninitiated. That's what it's actually like to be deployed. You still have to. It feels like garrison sometimes. You got people that are like, "Oh, you got your hands in your pockets. Oh, your boots aren't blouse high enough." Like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? We're in Marjah. We're in a combat zone.
I will tell you, I never once experienced anything like that with my 3 months with 1-6.
That's good.
It was 2-6. They were watching us on the G-Boss, and they would get on the radio saying, hey, Shadow 1-4, why is your Marine's Kevlar unbuckled? Why is your Marine's sleeves rolled up to his forearms?
I've talked about
Stuff
that
like
before.
that.
I've talked about that kind of thing before on the podcast, and it's like the amount that's part of the reason why things couldn't get accomplished like they should have probably, or fast as they should have, in like combat zones, because you have this weird level of oversight that's never been available before. Where a full bird colonel in Leatherneck can be watching an ISR feed, a UAV feed, like a Predator feed or something like that, and say something like, hey, so-and-so doesn't have his gloves on. Call down there. And it's like, what are you doing, dude? If Lance Corporal so-and-so, it's like, I don't know. And maybe people will say, they should have had their gloves on. They should have had their iPro on or whatever. But the amount of like micromanagement is outrageous. It was outrageous. And that's why, like, me as a fires guy, it was frustrating because normally, like in training and stuff, you come up with a call for fire or a fire support plan, an airstrike or something like that. You get all the stuff. You look over at the guy next to you who's the approval authority. He goes, yeah, looks good. It's approved. When you go into combat, you don't just look over to the guy next to you and go, is that good? No. You gotta, there's like layers, depending on what kind of weapon you're using, what ordnance is being employed. There's like layers of bureaucracy. Some colonel or general over at some fucking base, 70 miles away, who doesn't actually know what's going on the ground, is making the decision of whether you can drop a piece of ordnance or not because of one reason or another. It was absolutely ridiculous. And I remember in 2011 when I was there with 3-6, one of the best things that happened while we were there is that we finally got HIMARS approval authority down to the battalion level. Because before that, you had to call regiment, who was at Dwyer, You had to call outside to, I'm trying to strike a guy that's putting in an IED. That only takes a few minutes. And every step of bureaucracy between me and that strike is just slows everything down. And I mean, one time we missed some guys probably by 20 seconds. Because we're waiting on approval from fucking higher. It's like, I don't know. It's very frustrating.
I experienced that too. It's very frustrating when you're watching a guy right in front of you putting an IED in the ground that Marines are going to drive over in half an hour, and there's a Predator with a Hellfire, but you need a general to say fire. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't answer the phone.
And it's at all levels, though. It's at all levels, because when I was there in Sangin in 13, we had 3-4 was it was their AO. They came in about a third of the way through the deployment, and they took over. It was their AO. And I remember my buddy Stork, he was another JTAC. He was with 3-4. I would go over to 3-4's command center and sit down in there with him and just kind of bullshit with him and maybe help him out if he had stuff going on. And I remember one time I was over there bullshitting with them, and there was guys putting in an IED. We're watching it. We're watching these dudes run from this blown up compound out to a culvert, and they would, the first little sprint over, they brought the jugs out. The second sprint over, they brought the wires out. They were one at a time, bringing pieces one at a time. And we're watching all this. And Stork requests a Harrier, gets it, and talks him onto target, has everything ready to go. And he's getting ready to do this strike, and he gets approval from the battalion. And as the aircraft is getting set and calls his in call, meaning he's getting ready to drop ordnance, and that's when the JTAC would be like cleared hot. Well, when he's coming around getting his in call, the company commander goes, "Hey, abort him, abort." And he goes, abort. Like, what's going on? He looked back at the company commander, and he's like, "Sir, well, is this not good?" And he's like, "Well, I just want to make sure the battalion is sure they want to do this strike." And we're like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? These guys are putting it. So in state is, we didn't strike the guys. They got away. I mean, and it's funny because the building that they were like staging out of to run all this shit out, there was no roof on it. It had been blown up already. And you could see a machine gun and an RPG like leaning against the wall. We couldn't strike them in that building because it was a compound, even though it had been blown up before. So these guys got away. And then we had to send someone out to go dismantle the IED. And then every time we went over that culvert, every time after that, I just braced a little. It's like, oh shit. And it became a checkpoint on our maps. We're like, hey, preparing to go over the culvert, and you'd see everybody kind of, okay, no IED. But that's the frustrating part of it,
Yeah, I think combat is confusing, and it can be very frustrating.
Yeah.
The movies make it look like it's some action-packed thing, but most of the time it's what's going on, where are the enemy, what do I need to do? In my book, I talk about some of that stuff. Our reinforcements came. There's a Marine rifleman squad nearby, and we're just getting pounded by the Taliban, and we're yelling at them to fire back. And they don't fire back. Like, they're right there. We're giving them ADRACs, where to, directions and where to shoot, distance, and all that stuff. And they're like, Corporal, we don't have PID. We don't have positive identification on who's shooting at us. And it's like that whole 300-meter tree line is shooting at you. Just shoot something. I don't know if it's like the mentality, but I think they're probably more afraid of the punishment that their leadership told them they were going to get if they shot somebody they weren't supposed to. Mm-hmm. And we had a Marine dead, like right next to him, and they were just laying there not shooting.
That's
and then
crazy.
I talk about it, then the QRF finally shows up, and I'm screaming at the machine gunner on the QRF to just get the 50 going and just start cutting down trees. And he goes, "Oh, I don't have PID." what do you do?
Yeah.
It's just frustrating.
Yeah, they're not going to wave a flag and say I'm right here. But if I'm getting shot at from a tree line, it's pretty,
You're not having green Ivans pop up on a range. It's people shooting from cover and concealment.
Yeah. That's at all levels, man. That's at all levels. People are worried about their career or if they're going to get in trouble rather than engaging the enemy. I had that example with that company commander, and then I had another example with the battalion commander of 3-4, who I was pinned down on a rooftop, and I had a guy shooting at me, and I was literally laying flat on my back with rounds like flying over my face, like fucking super close. I remember Fosberg, one of the other guys on my team. Anytime we stopped anywhere, because I was the JTAC, anytime we stopped anywhere, I'm like, are we going to be here for more than 5 minutes? Okay, well, I'm going to get on the rooftop, because I'd start scanning shit. And I remember him just peeking just his eyes over the edge of the roof, be like, are you okay? And I'm like, I'm fine, I'm okay. But I'm like pinned down, rounds are flying right over my face, and I got a Harrier on station, and I have this ISR feed, which is the video feed from his camera on his pod. I'm looking at it through this little sensor that I have, and I'm talking to him, and I got the guy, and I'm requesting to drop ordnance on him, and the battalion commander denied it because he was standing next to a mud wall. They considered, at that time, any mud wall is considered a compound, and it could not be destroyed. And I'm like, dude, we're sitting here pinned down. That happened twice on that deployment where that battalion commander would not give approval to drop ordnance for one reason or another. And both times it was very frustrating. And I'm like, it must be very nice to sit in the command center listening to people getting shot at and go, nah, we're not going to drop that bomb. Nah, sorry guys, figure it out. And it's like, dude, I'm out here fucking living through this right now. Like, what the fuck, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's frustrating.
I think for my experiences, I was very lucky that we were not part of a battalion. We were considered an independent team that just operated in another battalion's AO. And the only person I answered to was a captain who, he let us do whatever we wanted.
Yeah.
So we were, kind of just cowboys out there. And we got to be able to do our missions how we needed to do them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we were too, but we were also still within their battle space. So everything had to be approved by them, basically. And it was just, they didn't necessarily like having us out there because we were doing, in 13, nobody was going outside the wire at that point and saying it except for us because they were trying to make it Afghan front and center. Like, hey, the Afghan army has to take over this fight. And so the Marines with 3-4 were basically told to stay on base the whole time. I remember we'd come back from missions and the company gunny or whatever would be pissed because we weren't helping them police call and fucking do stuff on the base. And we're like, bro, we just got back from a patrol and we got another one tomorrow. Like, you guys aren't doing shit. Go ahead and do police call and do this bullshit. Like, what? I don't know, man. That kind of stuff made me so mad. I'm like, why are you fucking sending dudes out here if you're not even going to use them? If they're here to pull weeds and police call.
Yeah, I remember I got threatened by a first sergeant he said he was going to write me up on charges. So I don't know if that means court-martial or NJP or something because I wouldn't walk him back to his base. Mm-hmm. And it's like, dude, I'm not part of your battalion, for one. And two, I just had a sniper round go like an inch from my ear half an hour ago. This is my downtime. And, luckily, we had a commissioned officer with us, and I went to him, and he diplomatically sorted things out. But,
shenanigans.
Shenanigans. That's all it is. So,
something I really enjoyed about working with the Afghans was like eating meals with them and just kind of having discussions. Is that the same with you?
Yeah. Some of the guys that I served with in the team, they didn't really in their downtime, they didn't really hang out with the Afghans very much. I kind of knew that I would never have this opportunity again in my life. Mm-hmm. And I'm the kind of person that wants to try to experience something new. And I wanted to experience as much of this culture as I could while I had the opportunity. So most mornings I had breakfast with the Afghans or dinner, hung out with them a lot.
Did that
It was
change
pretty enjoyable.
Did that change your perspective of the Afghans in general, or what was going on in Afghanistan?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I remember being on patrol and just looking at the people going by, little kids working, men working their fields, harvesting their crops, and I realized that these people are, I'm 22 years old. I haven't really experienced much life at this point, and then I see all this happening in this other side of the world that everybody's been telling me is like the world's worst place to live in my entire life, and I experience it, and like they're no different than us. They're just trying to provide for their family.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, there were guys that I always said there were guys in the Afghan army that were straight warriors that wanted to fight for their country and make it a better place. And then there were pieces of shit that were there just because they got a paycheck or whatever, And,
sounds like the Marine Corps.
Yeah. And the other thing that I tried to explain to people too is like when they talked about how bad the Afghan soldiers were or how bad they were or whatever. They weren't as capable as us. I'm like, well, let's also remember that we have a Marine Corps that's over 200 years old and has 200 years of experience refining the little things and making it the easiest to train. Like that, there's a lot that you get lost in that experience over hundreds of years, That's one. And two, like when we would go to Sangin, that's a 7-month rotation. I'm going there for 7 months, maybe a year at most, and then I'm coming home. Well, these fucking Afghan guys are living there. They're in Sangin for a long time. They don't get to like, 7 months. It's over. Let's go back home and crack a beer and relax. Yeah. No, dude. They're still fighting. Those are the same soldiers that were there for multiple rotations of Marines. And you see how like affected Marines could be after some of their deployments because of how dangerous they were, things that happen. Now, put yourself in the mindset of a dude that doesn't get to leave. He's been there for 2 years. He's seen all these atrocities it just doesn't end for him, and I think people forget that, when they're talking about the Afghans and the Afghan National Army and police and stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And then now with the Taliban in charge, if they're still alive, I was reading an article in NPR, I think it was, where they interviewed a former Afghan policeman, and he's like in Marjah or Kandahar or something picking apples, and he can't get a better job because the people know he used to be a police officer, and if he makes too much noise, then they'll just make him disappear.
Yeah.
So it's
fucking
rough life.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy, man. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. It's that's why I think a lot of people, especially people that knew Afghans personally, that like actually had there was a lot of Marines and soldiers and whoever that went over to Afghanistan that never had a conversation with an Afghan. They never sat down and had meals with them. It just wasn't part of their job, so they don't really necessarily understand that. And that was one of the rough things for guys that knew Afghans when everything went to shit. And you're like, dude, I think about Sergeant Major Hassan. I'm like, is that dude still alive? Probably not. He probably got killed by Taliban at some point. And it's shitty, it's a shitty feeling thinking about that.
Yeah. And, I don't really talk bad about the Afghan police officers because they saved my life. And they put themselves in harm's way to help us retrieve a fallen Marine. In my book, I talk about one policeman in particular during this firefight that if it was a Marine, he would have got the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross.
Oh,
but he was a Afghan police officer, so it was just another day.
Yeah. They thought it was a big deal. Like sometimes we would give them like a NAM or something like that. Like the command would give them like an award, and that was like a big deal. They would wear that ribbon on their uniform for like forever after that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's crazy. So I don't want to give away anything from the book. Do you want to talk about anything else that happened in that?
I mean, it's all nonfiction, so there's no real spoilers, but it's a story about me going on the second patrol of a day in late July. We were going out to set up an ambush on the Taliban, and we became engaged by the after action report said 30 to 40 Taliban, which if that's accurate, that's pretty extreme.
That is.
And we had 8 Marines and 8 police officers with us. One of the Marines was killed at the beginning of the fight. And a couple other were wounded or knocked unconscious. And it's not, a story of my career. It's just this is what, if you want to know what combat's like, I write pretty detailed of the chaos and the emotions you go through while engaged. And I honestly believe that if you change the characters and the backdrop of my story to anything else, Vietnam or anything, it really wouldn't change a whole lot of the story.
Yeah.
Because I've had some Vietnam guys read it, and they're like, yeah, that's what it was like for me. So. Yeah.
I mean, I like that. I was going to point out, too, I assume that range flag behind you is the one from the book.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, you want to explain that?
Stolen. Yeah. So when we were doing our pre-deployment training at Camp Upshur, I think there's only a couple guys that are still under the UCMJ, but I'm sure the statute of limitations is over. It was Christmas time, and we had a Secret Santa thing going on with the Marines, and it only had one rule: whatever gift that you get for your Secret Santa person, it had to be stolen. It couldn't be something that you already had or purchased. So we had a platoon of military police officers going around Quantico stealing everything they could. I got a range flag that was stolen from the Marine Corps rifle team, and I've had it ever since.
That's awesome. The Anglo detachment on the 11th MEU did something similar. One of the teams did something similar. I remember. I didn't know I was the team chief. I think for that one I was the team chief. No, it was my second one. I was the MEU fires chief. So I wasn't part of it, but I remember when they were like, when they were getting ready to give their gifts, they're like, we had to steal these. And I'm like, wait, what? And it was like a watch cap for one of the naval officers and shit like that. It was like all these random things. I'm like, Jesus, dude, I didn't hear any of this. I don't want to know anything about it. It's funny though.
Our staff sergeant got 4 pool balls. It was like 0, 3, 6, and 9 or something like that because he was an 0369.
Mm-hmm.
And they were stolen from the DEA facility in Upshur. And our gunnery sergeant got a firing pin from a rifle, and he started freaking out. And then we told him it was from his rifle.
How did you guys? I remember reading that. How did you guys get his rifle pin or his firing pin without him knowing?
I served with kleptomaniacs.
Got the armory.
And when we were deploying, it was probably just sitting. We probably stole it when he was sleeping. Fire watch or something. When we were flying out from Cherry Point, we landed in Maine.
Yeah.
And there was another unit flying out there on a different flight. Army guys. They left all of their rifles on the benches and the terminal with no gear guard. So we stole everything that was bolted onto their rifles that wasn't serialized.
Yeah.
Grip pods, all sorts of stuff.
That's a very Marine thing to do. That's classic. Yeah. Steal from the Army.
Oh,
steal what you need.
Yeah, we stole a Humvee in Leatherneck too, and returned that after we did what we needed with it.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think you'll write another book, or do you think that this is it for you? You just want to get that one story out?
I think this is probably it. The reason I was able to write this is because I started writing it as the memories were there.
Yeah.
And for like a couple of years, every time I remembered anything at all, whether it was what somebody said or how they looked, I wrote it down. And then after several years, I had a huge pile of notes on a Word document, and then I turned it into a narrative that somebody could enjoy reading. I think I'm probably gonna write a little book for my kids based on their D&D type adventures, but that's not a Marine Corps book. That'll just be something for them.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I think that's really cool, and I mean, that was kind of one of the reasons I started the podcast, because I was like, there's so many stories out there that people have that will never be known to anyone, because it's not something that's going to get put in a history book. It's not a major event. You know, we're not generals, so no one cares kind of deal. But it doesn't mean that it's not worth being told and recorded and stuff. And I encourage all veterans that, you know, did anything that they, you know, I don't know. I encourage everyone to put something down, you know, either write a book or do a podcast interview with somebody, or write a journal. That way your kids, your grandkids, your great grandkids can know from the horse's mouth what it was like for you to be in the military, what it was like for you to deploy. And I mean, imagine, I wish, that'd be so crazy. My grandfather was in Japan at the end of World War II. Like, imagine what I could have known if I had like recorded history of what he did there. You know, like that would be such a cherished part of what I have. And it's like, now in 2024, there's no reason not to. Even if you record something just for yourself, you know, you make a voice memo on your phone that you can share with people later on. I really highly encourage people to do what you did at a minimum. Memories come up, write it down or record it somewhere so it's not forgotten, you know, because these things are important.
Yeah. And, you know, what you're saying about your grandfather, in the end of the book, I have a little bit of that stuff I've kind of put naturally in there. I'm the only person that has heard certain stories from some of my family members on Iwo Jima or Vietnam. And, you know, nobody else knows them except for me. So if I put a little bit of that in here, then at least it has some history that they aren't, you know, gone.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important. I mean, you may have heard this phrase, like people die twice, right? When you die, and then the last time someone says your name, you know? So you're never actually dead until the last time somebody says your name. And I think it's just important to, I don't know, it's important to record this stuff. And it also is good for perspective. You know, like why relearn things? Why go through and it's these cycles of us doing dumb shit over and over again because no one had the will or whatever to write it down and be like, hey, this is what we did and it didn't work, or it did work and this is why. And use that as a guide for, I don't know, history repeats itself. So, I don't know. I think it's great, man. What did the other people that were part of your unit think about you writing the book?
They're supportive. You know, it's again, going back to the reserves, it's different being a reservist.
Yeah. Because
you're in the same unit the entire time and you're all geographically in the same place. So the guys that I served with in Afghanistan, we get together every summer on the anniversary of Abe Howard's death. His parents host us and it brought us into their family. So people have known I've been working on this for a while. It wasn't until recently that I was like, yeah, I'm actually going to put this into a published work and not just have it as a personal project.
Mm-hmm.
But a few of them read it and, you know, they've told me they've cried already reading it. Filled in a lot of blanks of what happened and, you know, they're very supportive. And I'm glad for that support, you know.
Yeah.
I got a phone call last summer from a Marine that I went to MP school with, Alvaro Alvarez. And, you know, I haven't seen this guy in a long time. And somehow he got a very early draft of this that nobody was supposed to read. And he's like, hey, man, you know, that's a great thing. I make every one of my squad leaders read this when they become a squad leader, because they need to know that being a Marine reservist isn't 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, that you can go at any time, you can go to war and you need to be prepared for it.
For sure.
So he's like, he thanked me. He said how, you know, this early draft that he saw, you know, that it's influenced him and his Marines and he makes all his Marines read it. It kind of gave me the motivation of like, all right, every night after my kids go to bed, I'm going to start working on this. And then I had 3 months of parental leave that gave me enough time to get it finished and edited and polished and out to an editor and do all that stuff. So
that positive feedback is key. I mean, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you think or your thoughts on it, but sometimes I ask myself, like, am I the right person to be like the podcast host? You know, who am I who am I to be the guy to share some of these stories? Like we talked about before we started, you know, I've had some pretty amazing people on, multiple Delta guys, multiple, you know, SF dudes, MARSOC guys that have done all these crazy things that I've never done. You know, who am I to be the one to share their stories and stuff like that? And even in my own community, within the JTAC community, so many guys have done way more stuff than I've ever done, you know, and those guys were out the door on a deployment, knowing about their next deployment before they even got home. You know, just doing work. And sometimes I question, like, why am I the guy that's doing the podcast? Why am I the guy? But I got a lot of good feedback from dudes that were like glad to hear the stories and see the stuff was being shared. And that kind of made me feel better about it. But I went through this phase for a while. Like, am I really, like, you know, who am I to be telling this story kind of deal? Did you have any kind of thoughts like that?
I mean, I'm kind of nervous and anxious that it's, you know, a deeply personal story with, you know, my wife read it and she's like, I think some people's feelings might be hurt when they read it. And I was like, nothing I say in there didn't happen.
Yeah.
Even the dialogue that happens in there, if I have written dialogue, it's because somebody said that.
Yeah.
So, you know, if people's feelings are hurt, you know, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to give an accurate representation of what it's like to be in combat.
Well, I would rather read an accurate representation and what actually happened rather than something that's fluffed up to make people look better or feel better about themselves. That's how we lead. That's how we go down the road of bullshit. And, you know, because if you did do that, if you did fluff it up so that someone didn't look as incompetent or whatever, maybe mistakes were made in decision making. If you changed the narrative and tried to say it wasn't that way, the people that were there would be like, bullshit, that's not what happened, you know. And that's way worse because then you're lying.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I don't know if what we did were crimes or not, but it's in there. It doesn't make everybody look very good, but tensions get pretty high when, you know, your buddy's laying dead next to you and you got a platoon of Taliban on the other side of the road. So you know, it's pretty graphic, so I don't suggest people read it if they're not okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they got to know the truth, man. People got to know the truth. Yeah, man, I think it's good stuff. What do you do now? What are you up to nowadays?
I'm a federal employee.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We'll leave it at that then.
Good. I used the I finished college and did some stuff and wasn't enjoying life. So I used folk rehab through the VA and went to a trade school and became a gunsmith and went to a gunsmithing school, worked in that for a while, and now I work in the firearms realm for the federal government.
Somebody else just said something to me about that a week ago. Like, my buddy was just like, dude, you know how many people get out and go get a gunsmithing license or get training in gunsmithing? I'm like, really? I was like, I've heard a couple people, but that's a huge thing. Like, a lot of people use their GI Bill or Voc Rehab for that kind of training. Where did you get that training at?
The Pennsylvania Gunsmith School out in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
It was a 16-month program. It's one of the better schools in the country. I would recommend it. But I think people need to know that you really just don't make a whole lot of money as a gunsmith.
Yeah.
If you want to make money, be a welder or a plumber. Well, it's good work. You do make money in gun sales if that's something somebody wants to go into, but that's not really being a gunsmith. But I enjoy it because it's very mechanical and a hands-on trade.
Yeah.
So it opens a lot of doors too.
Yeah. I mean, you probably meet so many interesting people too. You probably get your hands on a lot of different, like, interesting firearms, you know, when someone's bringing you. I mean, what's the oddest gun that you've worked on?
Well, my current job with the federal government, probably the most odd stuff you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
So
we'll just leave it at that then.
Okay. But, you know, gunsmithing in the private, you know, on your own, you know, it's either making, you know, tactical guns or stuff like that. I worked in a rural area, so it was like cleaning people's hunting rifles and dirty 22s and, you know, occasionally building rifles for folks. But, you know,
Do you have a lot of people bring you a gun after they've already tried to be a gunsmith and messed it up pretty good, and then they're like, all right, let me bring in a professional?
No, they never mess it up. It's always their son or their cousin. But yeah, it's the same thing with the mechanic. I'm sure. Hey, my son started working on my car, and now it doesn't run so right. Okay, sure,
sure. Do you feel? I mean, how is that? The gunsmithing world. I mean, you're doing it for the government, so it's not a big of a deal. But for a private gunsmith person, what kind of? That feels like there's like a lot of rules and regulations behind that. Is there a lot of liability in that job? I mean, because if you fuck something up on a gun, that can obviously not be good.
There's always liability because if somebody gets hurt, they're gonna try to sue somebody.
Yeah.
So you protect yourself and your assets, by having a whatever business license you need to separate yourself or work for somebody else. So they had the liability, not you. But yeah, there's federal regulations for having a working on firearms or having firearms be your business, buying, selling, stuff like that, where you get a federal firearms license, and that's all a very simple process. Simple record keeping. It's nothing too intensive or intrusive. It's mainly just dealing with customers was the hard part, which is one of the reasons why I got out of it. But the federal employment adds a lot of stability that you don't get as a small business owner. So
are you a full-time employee, or are you like a contracted employee?
I'm a full-time employee.
Okay. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, get benefits and all that stuff with it, right? Does that roll into your normal, like your retirement that you earned, time that you earned in the Marine Corps?
Yeah. So as a reservist, most of my time doesn't count.
Yeah.
But my deployment and some of my active duty trainings, that time I got credited and I purchased it back. So I had about 13 months of active duty time, and it cost me $600. So now I get to retire 13 months earlier. So
for 600, that's what do you mean you
that's pretty
purchased
sweet.
It back?
It's like a buyback thing. So you have your military time and you got paid for it and all this stuff. I don't know the things of it, but I had to send forms and my DD-214s to DFAS. They told me how much I made. Then I sent that form to, the Office of Personnel Management, and they said, okay, you owe $600 if you want to count your military time as your federal employment time.
That's so weird.
It was worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it is, but that's just like a weird...
If you have like 20 years in and you have a military retirement, it's probably not worth it because you're already, getting a retirement benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, I've enjoyed the conversation. I think people need to check out the book. It's not out yet, right? When does it come out?
February 29th.
Okay, so I'm probably going to release this podcast tomorrow. So that's like a week and a half for people that are listening. Check it out. I'll put a link to the book in the show description. Where can people find you at, man?
They can find me primarily on Instagram at the Warfighters Lounge.
I love the name too.
Thanks. And there's a Facebook page that's just a link from that. The name, though, I didn't know what to name it until about a month ago. And it's just the sign that we had hanging from our living area. It just said the Warfighters Lounge, Combat Action Marines only. And I'm like, it's a little pretentious, but we're a little bit arrogant, so it makes for a good name.
Makes for a good name. It's cool, too. I bet when when it clicked, that should be the name, it was probably like, Once you get the name and it clicks, you're like, that's such a good name. And it's something that's probably right in front of you the whole time.
Yeah, I had like 6 other names, and then I was just reading through my book one day. I was like, maybe, just clicked.
Yeah. So. Well, that's awesome, man. Everybody, you can check out my stuff, Former Action Guys, Former Action News on Instagram. My website's jkramergraphics.com. And that's it, dude. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.